Admiral Victor Morales grew up in a small town by the coast, where the sun painted the waves gold each morning. His parents had come from another country, dreaming of a better life. They worked long hours in a factory and a diner, but they always made time to teach Victor about honor and duty. From the moment he could walk, Victor helped his mother clean dishes and carry boxes. He learned that hard work and respect for others mattered more than money or fame. When he was 10, he stood by the window of his bedroom and watched a ship loaded with goods lock into the harbor gates. He did not yet know that one day he would help guard those gates himself. School was not always easy for Victor. He was shy at first, and sometimes other children teased him because he had a different name, or because his lunch included foods they had never tried. He learned to stand a little taller when taunts came his way. He found comfort in books about explorers, laws, and history. In those pages he saw people who faced hard odds and yet chose to do the right thing. He began writing stories in a worn notebook about sea voyages and desert journeys, where the heroes showed kindness even when danger loomed. By the time he was 14, Victor knew he wanted to serve his community and protect people who traveled across borders. After high school, Victor joined a training academy for customs officers. He felt the uniform suited him, the badge on his chest a promise he made to himself and to everyone he swore to protect. The academy was strict. He rose early for drills before dawn, ran laps until his legs burned, and studied manuals late into the night. He partnered with classmates to learn search procedures and rules of evidence. He also learned to show respect to every traveler, no matter where they came from or how they looked. When others rushed through inspections, eager to finish quickly, Victor moved with steady care, asking questions in a calm tone, listening to answers, and making each person feel seen. Among the recruits, he stood out not just for his quiet confidence, but for his kindness. One day, an elderly woman arrived with a small bundle of handmade scarves. She spoke broken English, and she grew anxious when customs officers asked about her items. Victor knelt to her eye level, spoke softly in a few words of her language, and showed her the inspection process. She relaxed and gave him a gentle nod of thanks. Small moments like these became known among his fellow officers. They saw how travelers smiled back at him, how his patience eased tension at the checkpoints. Within 5 years, Victor earned promotions. He traveled along the southern border, helping stop smugglers who tried to move illegal goods. He worked with people from different agencies, immigration officers, border patrol, and local law enforcement. He treated each partner with respect. Even when they argued over procedure or complained about paperwork, his calm voice and fair judgment helped them find solutions and keep operations moving smoothly. He wrote reports that were clear and kind, praising good work and pointing out mistakes without blame. Back at home, Victor's parents watched his rise with pride. His mother framed his first commendation letter and hung it in the kitchen. His father tucked a photo of Victor in uniform into a wallet, carrying it with him wherever he went. At family dinners, they spoke of Victor's courage and fairness. Neighbors came over to congratulate him, and children in the street asked to shake his hand. To Victor, none of that mattered more than knowing he had stood by his own values. He remembered the lessons from his parents: always help those in need, speak up for what is right, and treat every person with dignity. Yet beneath the praise, something uneasy began to stir. Early on, Victor noticed that some police officers seemed wary of him. When they learned he spoke Spanish and came from immigrant roots, their tone would shift. He heard them whisper among themselves, wondering how that Morales earned so many medals. At first, he tried to ignore it. He focused on his work, on the lives he could protect, and on the ways he could improve processes so families did not face long waits or confusion at border crossings. As he climbed higher, the questions grew sharper. At a joint meeting with the county sheriff's office, a deputy sneered as Victor explained a new search protocol. "Does Morales even know our rules?" the deputy muttered loud enough for others to hear. Victor kept his calm. He repeated the question politely, asked for the deputy's input, and worked to find common ground. Later, the deputy apologized in private, blaming stress and too many late shifts. Victor accepted the apology, but felt a cold knot in his chest. He realized that no matter how well he performed, some people would see him first as an outsider. Despite those moments, Victor found strength in friendships with officers who valued his skill and fairness. Sergeant Leah Nguyen, who also came from a family of immigrants, often teamed up with Victor. Together, they planned community outreach, events to teach travelers about their rights and to explain customs rules. Children painted pictures of customs officers, and seniors thanked them for clear instructions. These events warmed Victor's heart, reminding him why he chose this path. By the time Victor was in his 40s, he had earned the rank of Admiral in the Customs Service. It was a title few of his classmates had imagined for him back in the training academy dorms. He now led teams in major operations, designed training programs, and advised on policy changes. His career was a model of success, textbooks cited. His inspection improvements, fellow officers sought his opinion on tough cases. Even politicians asked for his guidance on border security. Still, some tension remained. In meetings with local police, Victor sometimes felt invisible. When he spoke, a few officers would check their watches or frown, as if they expected him to say something wrong. He sensed they assumed he did not understand local concerns or traditions. Victor would remind himself that hard work and kindness always won over doubt. He resolved to stay true to his values, to keep building trust one conversation at a time. At home, Victor's teenage daughter and young son admired him. They watched news clips of him speaking at conferences, always dressed in uniform, always speaking calmly about fairness and safety. They saw their father as a hero who stood for rules and for people. At night, he told them stories about his childhood by the sea, learned around the kitchen table, and how a single act of kindness could change someone's fear into gratitude. He taught them to listen first, speak with respect, and stand up for justice, even when it was hard. As the years passed, Victor's record glowed with achievement and honor. He had never forgotten the early lessons of his youth, that true strength came from lifting others up, not pushing them down. He kept the small notebook he used as a boy, filled with sketches of ships and notes on fairness, carried it to every meeting, a simple reminder of where he started and why he chose this life. And yet, in the quiet moments before dawn, Victor sometimes wondered how long he could keep walking a straight path when others tried to push him off course. He knew storms would come, and that soon he would face tests far greater than paperwork or training drills. But in that gentle morning light, with the sea breeze brushing his window, Victor Morales believed in himself and in the promise he made long ago to serve with honor, to protect with care, and to treat every person with the respect he wished for his own family. Victor Morales had become a respected admiral in the Customs Service, but even at the top, he could feel the cold wind of doubt following him. His title brought weight, yet some people refused to see beyond his skin color or his background. Trouble began when he was asked to lead a joint task force with the Delta County Sheriff's Office. It was meant to be a smooth collaboration. Together, they were supposed to stop illegal goods from passing through a busy shipping route in the Southwest. On paper, it looked like a perfect partnership, federal customs working with local law enforcement. But in reality, it was something very different. From the very first meeting, Victor noticed how the deputies looked at him. Some gave half smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Others avoided eye contact completely. When he introduced himself and extended his hand, a few shook it politely. But some simply nodded, their hands still in their pockets. Victor didn't say anything. He had dealt with quiet resistance before, and he believed respect could still be earned over time. He began attending daily briefings with the local officers. These were meant to share information and updates, yet every time he spoke, he felt the silence grow heavier in the room. When other officers made suggestions, they were met with nods. But when Victor spoke, some deputies looked away or scribbled in their notebooks. It wasn't what they said did, it was what they didn't say. Their silence was louder than any words. Victor tried not to take it personally. He focused on the mission. He studied the traffic patterns, looked into reports of suspicious cargo, and suggested better patrol schedules. Some of his ideas helped catch minor smuggling attempts, but he noticed that when he gave credit to officers from Delta County, they didn't return the favor. Instead, they spoke in private circles, their voices low but sharp. He sometimes caught pieces of their conversations, phrases that hinted they didn't trust outsiders, or didn't think papermen, like Victor, knew what it was like in the field. Still, Victor remained calm. He believed in doing the right thing even when others didn't notice. But one day, something happened that he couldn't ignore. During a routine checkpoint drill, he was reviewing paperwork beside one of the deputies. The officer clicked the radio and whispered something into his collar mic. Then, as if by accident, the channel stayed open. Across the radio, a voice said something unkind. It wasn't direct, but it clearly referred to Victor and his position. The tone was mocking. A few words suggested that the Admiral thought he was in charge of real men. Victor stood still. He didn't react, simply reached over, turned off the radio channel, and finished his inspection. That night, he sat alone in his office and thought for a long time. He wondered if these quiet jabs would ever stop, or if this was the price he had to keep paying for his rank. The next week, things grew worse. A scheduled night operation was set to begin at 2 a.m. Victor and his team were supposed to meet at a warehouse just off the main road. It was meant to be a dry runner practice session, not a real bust. But when Victor arrived, none of the Delta County officers were there. The warehouse was dark and quiet. Only his junior customs officers stood waiting, confused. Then, just as Victor pulled out his phone to make a call, a group of patrol trucks arrived. The deputies stepped out, their body language tense. Their eyes shifted as they walked toward him. Victor greeted them politely, but they barely answered. One of them said, "We changed the plan. You weren't informed?" Another added, "Thought you were too busy to come down here." Victor remained calm. He asked for the updated briefing, but the lead deputy simply shrugged. No explanation was given. The team went ahead with the drill, but something felt off. Victor later found out the plan had been changed 2 hours earlier, and an email was sent but not to him. He didn't complain. Instead, he filed a quiet report about the missed communication. He hoped it would be handled with fairness. But again, nothing happened. 2 weeks later, Victor received a sealed envelope in his office. Inside was a single printed paper with no name. It was a warning. "Be careful who you trust," it read. "Some people here don't want you leading this. They think you're in the wrong seat." The words weren't threatening, but they weren't friendly either. Victor sat back in his chair and stared at the note for a long time. He didn't know who sent it. Was it someone trying to help him, or someone mocking him? Either way, it was clear there were people on this task force who didn't want him around, instead of backing away. Victor did what he had always done. He worked harder. He asked more questions, double-checked reports, and stayed on the ground. Longer than any other senior official. He joined the patrols, walked through the cargo zones, and interviewed shipping managers directly. Some of the younger officers began to respect him. They saw his calm leadership and the way he handled even the toughest situations without raising his voice. But the older ones, the ones who had been in the sheriff's office for years still, kept their distance. Victor tried once more to build bridges. He invited the sheriff to a community outreach event, hoping they could speak together about border safety and customs policies. The sheriff agreed but didn't show up. Later, he said he was caught in another meeting. Victor accepted the excuse, but the pattern was becoming clear. Something wasn't right. During the following months, Victor noticed small things happening again and again. His car tires were slashed outside a joint meeting. At another time, someone left a used coffee cup on his office chair with a note that said, "Federal Boy." The handwriting was messy, and no cameras had caught the person. These things were small, but they added up. Victor considered going to the media or filing a formal complaint, but he knew that might cause a wave of attention. And sometimes attention did more harm than good. Instead, he documented everything: dates, names, words, even tone. He built a quiet record of the disrespect, hoping that someday someone would believe him if he needed to speak. Still, through all of this, he stayed focused on his job. He led successful seizures of stolen electronics. He discovered a hidden tunnel beneath a shipping yard and helped close a major smuggling ring. His name was printed in several law enforcement journals as a model of calm leadership. But in the back rooms of Delta County, some officers still shook their heads and said, "He's not one of us." At home, Victor stayed strong for his family. He didn't tell them about the slashed tires or the rude notes. He simply said, "Work is busy." His children saw his tired eyes and asked him if he was okay. He smiled and said yes. But inside, he was beginning to wonder if his honesty and hard work would ever be enough to win over the hearts that had already decided not to see him clearly. Still every morning, Victor woke up, put on his uniform, and looked at himself in the mirror. He reminded himself why he started this journey: to serve, to protect, and to stand for what is right. He didn't need everyone's approval, but he hoped deep down that his work would speak louder than their doubt. What he didn't know yet was that something far more dangerous was about to unfold, something that would test his courage in a way no training ever could. The night was cool and quiet, with a soft wind brushing the streets of Delta County. Admiral Victor Morales stood outside a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of town, looking over a map with two junior officers from his customs team. They had received a tip about a possible storage site for unregistered goods, maybe stolen electronics or counterfeit packages. Nothing too dangerous, just a routine follow-up on some flagged containers. Still, Victor always took his duty seriously. He never treated any lead as small or unimportant. That's what made him one of the best in the field. Victor had arrived early as usual. He liked to inspect the area before his team moved in. The warehouse was large and looked abandoned, with broken windows and a rusty sign hanging by one chain. But he knew better than to trust appearances. Many illegal operations used quiet, forgotten places like this to move goods without attracting attention. As his officers prepared their equipment, Victor walked around the back of the warehouse. He scanned the perimeter and noticed fresh tire marks on the dirt road, a sign someone had recently been there. He also saw that the lock on the side door had been broken and poorly replaced with a cheaper one. Something was off. He radioed his team to stay alert. Just as he returned to the front of the building, headlights appeared from the main road. A black, unmarked vehicle pulled up fast. Victor stepped back, shielding his eyes from the glare. The vehicle screeched to a stop. Two men in dark uniforms jumped out, shouting, "Hands up! Don't move!" Victor was confused. He didn't recognize their voices. "This is Admiral Morales' U.S. Customs," he said loudly, raising his hands slowly. "I'm here on official duty." But they didn't respond to his words. One of them raised what looked like a weapon, his finger near the trigger. The other moved toward Victor quickly, shouting commands that didn't make sense. "Turn around!" "Get down!" he yelled, even though Victor was already standing still, clearly showing his badge. The moment felt frozen. Victor's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he had done nothing wrong. He had followed every rule, was in uniform, had called ahead, and was on the right assignment. Yet these men weren't listening. They weren't even trying to confirm who he was. Then, in the blink of an eye, one of the men fired. The sound cracked the air like thunder. The bullet missed Victor by inches and struck a metal barrel behind him. Sparks flew, and the two customs officers nearby dropped to the ground, shouting his name. Victor didn't think he moved. His instincts, built over years of training, kicked in. He dove behind a large crate, pulled out his radio, and yelled, "Officers under fire! This is Admiral Morales. You're being attacked and provoked by unknown units." He didn't fire back. He didn't want to risk hurting someone before understanding what was happening. But he stayed low, waiting for a response. The other customs officers quickly found cover, unsure if they were under attack by criminals or by some rogue group. Then the shouting stopped. The two men who had fired began to back away. Their vehicle door opened again. Another voice called out, "Cease fire! That's a federal badge." There was silence. Then one of the men walked forward slowly, now looking unsure. He approached with both hands up, breathing heavily. We thought you were someone else," he said. Victor stood up carefully, his badge still visible, his voice calm but firm. "You shot at a federal officer. Do you know what that means?" The second man, now shaking, said, "We didn't get the full briefing. Thought this was a sting on local suspects. Didn't know customs was on this one." Victor didn't raise his voice, simply looked at them and said, "Even in confusion, you confirm. You ask, you don't shoot first." The unmarked car quickly drove off and the officers disappeared. Into the night before backup could arrive, Victor's team checked him over. He was safe. No injuries, just shaken. The bullet hole in the barrel and a torn sleeve were the only evidence of how close it had been. Later that night, Victor sat alone in his vehicle. The shock had faded, replaced by something heavier: disappointment, fear, and a strange sadness. These weren't criminals. They were law enforcement. People meant to be on the same side. People who didn't take even a moment to ask who he was. If he hadn't moved quickly, that bullet could have ended everything. He filed a full report. The next morning, his hands were steady as he typed, but his heart was tired. He described the location, the time, the events, and the lack of response to his identification. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't accuse. He simply told the truth. When the report reached headquarters, there was silence for a few days. Then came the questions, not for the shooters, but for Victor. Were you clearly visible? Did you properly announce your agency before movement? Was your badge reflective enough in the dark? Victor answered calmly. Yes, and yes, but he could feel the undertone. People were trying to shift the blame, trying to say it was confusion or bad luck. But he knew better. This wasn't just an accident. It was the result of deep-rooted distrust. Someone else had been standing there, someone they knew or someone they expected. They might have paused. But they didn't pause for Victor. A few days later, the internal affairs officer called him. We've looked into it. The deputies were acting under pressure. No charges will be filed. They'll receive a refresher training. Victor thanked him and ended the call. He knew what it meant. The incident would be marked down as a misunderstanding, filed away in some dusty drawer, and the world would keep moving. But for Victor, things would never be the same. At home, he didn't tell his wife the full details. He just said there was a dangerous moment at work. She hugged him tightly and didn't ask more. But that night, she checked his uniform jacket and noticed the torn sleeve. She mended it without a word, her eyes filled with quiet worry. Victor sat on the porch that evening, staring at the stars. He thought about how close he had come to not seeing them again. He thought about how quickly trust could vanish, how easily fear could replace reason, and deep inside, something began to change. For the first time in his long career, Victor wondered if being right, being fair, being commif, all of that was enough in a world where people didn't always want to see the truth. He had faced many storms before, but this one felt different. It had come from the inside, from people who should have stood beside him. Still, he didn't give up. He took a deep breath, wrote everything down in his notebook, and reminded himself of his purpose to serve with honor, no matter the risk. We would not let one night erase a lifetime of values, but he also knew deep down that the road ahead had changed forever. Victor Morales woke the next morning with the memory of the shot still sharp in his mind. He sat at his desk, the dim light of dawn falling across the bullet hole in the metal barrel he had used for cover. His junior officers moved about the office, speaking in low tones as they reviewed their equipment and notes from the previous night. No one spoke of blame or anger. They simply did their jobs, carrying on as if nothing had happened. Victor admired their calm. He wished he could feel the same peace, but inside he felt a storm of frustration and hurt. By mid-morning, the official police report landed on his desk. It was brief, almost clinical. The deputies described an unidentified individual who had failed to respond to verbal commands and had assumed a threatening posture. They wrote that they had no choice but to fire. Victor read the words twice, then a third time, searching for fairness. His name was never mentioned. His badge number was not noted. He felt as if they were describing someone else, someone they did not recognize or care to know. His heart tightened at the thought that two men who should have protected him had chosen suspicion over respect. Victor drafted his own memo to his superiors in customs. He described the sequence of events clearly, his badge held high, his voice announcing Admiral Morales, U.S. Customs, the flash of muzzle fire that shattered the night air. He attached photographs of his uniform, the torn sleeve, and the bullet hole. He noted that the deputies had never asked a single question. He typed the words civil rights violation carefully, knowing they carried weight. When he pressed send, he felt a momentary relief. At least the truth was on record. Within hours, local news outlets picked up the story. A small TV station aired blurry night vision footage, calling it an odd border operation gone wrong. The reporter spoke in neutral tones, but suggested that miscommunication was to blame. Victor watched himself on screen, helmeted and serious, standing behind a wooden crate. He heard his own calm words, then the dispatcher voice saying, "Shots fired." It felt surreal. A few callers to the station's talk show mocked the federal paper pusher, who put local heroes in danger. Victor's stomach knotted. As he realized how quickly the public narrative could twist at Customs headquarters, Victor met with an internal affairs officer. The officer was polite but distant, as if he were reviewing a textbook case. He asked Victor standard questions. Had he followed protocol? Was his uniform visible? Did he announce himself clearly? The officer jotted notes without looking up. Victor answered each question with care, but he sensed a lack of empathy. Internal Affairs would review all evidence, he was told, and a recommendation would go to the commissioner. Victor nodded and left, wondering if the system he served could ever truly protect him. Concerned for his reputation, Victor reached out to a civil rights attorney, someone he had met years earlier. At a conference, the attorney agreed to help, offering to review the police report and advise on a possible lawsuit against the county. Victor met her in a small office near the courthouse. The walls were lined with framed cases, a testament to fights for justice. She listened as he spoke calmly about the shooting. When he finished, she leaned back and said softly, "You have a strong case, Victor, but it will be long and hard. Are you ready?" He paused, felt the weight of her question, and nodded. He would not let fear stop him now. As the lawsuit moved forward, Victor found himself waiting for depositions. On the appointed day, he entered a sterile conference room with his attorney by his side. Across the table sat the county's legal team and the two deputies who had fired their weapons. The room felt heavy with unspoken tension. Scratched on legal pads, and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee. Victor took a deep breath, chose a chair near the window where morning light slanted in, prepared to speak. The deputies went first. One described a dark figure who moved unpredictably. The other said he heard raised voices and felt unsafe. Neither mentioned the badge or the uniform. When his attorney asked why they did not identify him, they offered excuses of stress and poor lighting. Their answers rang hollow in the quiet room. Victor felt anger rise, but he kept a steady gaze. When his turn came, he spoke softly but firmly, repeated his name, his rank, the exact words he used. He described the broken lock on the door, the fresh tire tracks, and how he had radioed his own team. He ended by saying, "I expected better from fellow officers." His voice carried more emotion than he intended, but it was the truth. After the depositions, Victor walked out into the bright hall. His attorney fell into step beside him, saying his testimony was clear and credible. But she warned that the case would hinge on winning public sympathy as much as legal facts. Victor nodded, thinking of the news clips and the mocking callers. He felt tired in a way he had never known. At home that night, Victor could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His wife turned in the dark and asked if he was all right. He told her the depositions had gone well, but his voice faltered at the end. She reached over and squeezed his hand, her touch warm and steady. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. Their children, now 12 and 9, slept soundly in the next room, unaware of the fight their father faced. He closed his eyes and prayed they would grow up in a world where truth mattered. Soon news of the lawsuit spread to the community. At a small rally in front of the courthouse, a dozen people held signs reading, "We stand with Admiral Morales and justice for those who serve." Neighbors he had helped at outreach events spoke to reporters about his kindness and fairness. A local pastor prayed for him at Sunday service, and an online petition gathered hundreds of signatures. For the first time since the shooting, Victor felt a surge of hope that he was not alone, but back at the office, the bureaucracy showed another face. His superiors called him in. Speaking in careful tones about the strain on resources and the risk to interagency relations, they suggested he take a leave of absence until the case was settled. Victor's heart sank. He had devoted his life to customs. He had earned every badge and rank. Now they were asking him to step aside. He felt the weight of years of service being brushed away. Over the next few weeks, settlement talks began. The county offered a modest sum enough to cover legal fees, but far less than Victor believed was fair. Their lawyers also proposed that he resign as part of the agreement, arguing that both sides could move on more peacefully. Victor asked for time to think. He spent hours pacing his living room, staring at his children's drawings on the fridge and at the framed commendations on his wall. He remembered his parents' faces when they heard of his promotions and how proud they had been, he thought, of the promise he had made as a boy to do the right thing, no matter the cost. Finally, Victor made his decision. He would accept the settlement. He could continue fighting for years, but it would drain his spirit and his family's security. He wanted to protect them above all. He called his attorney and gave the word. Within days, the papers were signed. On his last morning in uniform, Victor walked through the halls of the customs office. He touched the brass nameplate outside his former office, polished and bright. He placed his badge on the desk, unfastening it slowly, as if easing himself out of a second skin. Junior officers peeked in, offering nods and quiet words of thanks. He smiled back, his eyes misty. At the door he paused and looked around one last time. Then he turned, held his head high, and stepped out into the new day, carrying the bitter price of... Victor Morales stepped out into the soft morning light for the last time wearing his customs uniform. He felt the weight of the badge in his hand more than ever before. The cool breeze carried a mix of pride and sorrow. He had given his life to this work, and now it was over. He walked slowly down the hall, each step echoing through the empty corridors he once filled with purpose. Every corner held a memory. The first time he gave a respectful nod to a traveler, the day he led his team through a tense operation, and even the night he barely escaped a bullet. All of it felt like yesterday and a lifetime ago. When he reached the front doors, his wife, Elena, and their 2 children waited outside. Maria ran forward and hugged him hard, a small bundle of warmth and innocence. His son, Diego, stood shyly beside his mother, eyes wide and proud. "Are you okay, Papa?" Maria asked, her voice soft but curious. He knelt and looked into her face. "I am," he said, though his throat tightened. "This is a long goodbye, but it's not the end." Diego stepped up and slipped a drawing into Victor's pocket, a picture of him standing tall in uniform. With a big smile, Victor smiled back through his tears. The days that followed were a blur of job applications and polite rejections. He sent resumes to other agencies, to private security firms, and to consulting groups. He even applied at the shipping companies he once inspected. Each response arrived with the same tone. "Thank you for your interest, but..." No one wanted to hire the man who had sued his former partners. "It's not fair," he told Elena. One evening, frustration lacing his voice, she simply held his hand. "You did what you believed was right. That is never unfair." He found an old friend, Pastor Ruiz, who offered a small office at the community center. It was a humble room, with a desk, a few chairs, and a window overlooking the street market. Each morning, Victor went there to meet people affected by unfair treatment. He listened to stories of teachers judged by their accents, of shopkeepers searched without cause, and of families afraid to speak up. Victor spoke with gentle authority. "You have rights," he reminded them. "You deserve respect." Word spread, and soon a handful of volunteers joined him. They organized small workshops and put up flyers in simple English and Spanish. In those workshops, Victor taught the customs of respect he learned as a boy, explained how to ask questions calmly, how to show identification clearly, and how to keep a record of every meeting. He invited a lawyer once a month to answer legal questions. People began to trust him. They called him Admiral with affection, even though his uniform was gone. He felt needed again, his heart swelling. With the same purpose that once guided him through storms and silence, he knew this was different work, but it mattered. Still, the old pain lingered in quiet moments. Sometimes at night he woke from a dream of that dark warehouse, the flash of gunfire, the smell of dust. He could still hear the shouted commands. That never waited for an answer. He would sit up in bed, his heart racing, and reach for his notebook on the bedside table. He wrote down every detail of the dream, as if capturing a ghost before it disappeared. Then he breathed deeply and reminded himself he was safe now. One Sunday, Alina found him on the porch, notebook open in his lap. She sat beside him and brushed a hand over his hair. "I see how much you carry," she said softly, "but you've turned your pain into something good." He nodded and closed the notebook. "I just want to make sure others don't go through what I did," he replied. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You're already doing that, one person at a time?" At school functions, Maria and Diego introduced him to their teachers and friends. "That's my dad," they said proudly. He helped coach Diego's little soccer team, calling plays and cheering every goal. He talked to teachers about fairness in discipline and inclusion. He volunteered at fundraisers, offering to help set up tables and chairs. Through it all, his children saw their father as a hero, not for the medals he once wore, but for the kindness he showed every day. Yet Victor could not shake the memories of lost opportunities. He missed the feeling of leading a team, the bustle of a busy office, the camaraderie that came with shared goals. He thought of the promotions he would have earned, the commendations he would have added to his wall. He thought of the respect that had once been his by right of rank and experience. That respect was gone. Felt like a ship without a captain, floating in unfamiliar waters. Despite that, he found a new horizon. He began writing short articles for a local paper about civil rights and fair treatment at checkpoints. He spoke at high schools about careers in public service and how ethics guide every choice. At a small civic meeting, he gave a speech. "We all belong here," he said, looking at the assembled faces. "No one's background should decide if they are trusted or rejected." The applause surprised him. It was warm and sincere. In that moment, he saw that his voice still mattered. Slowly, a different kind of life took shape. He and Alina started a nonprofit called Bridges of Respect. They held events where police officers, customs agents, and community members could meet and talk over coffee. Some old colleagues came awkward at first, then grateful for a chance to rebuild trust. They shared stories, laughed, and listened. Victor saw genuine shifts in some faces, and he knew change could happen. One evening, after a workshop, Victor spoke with a young deputy who had once been part of the task force. The deputy's eyes were downcast as he said, "I'm sorry for how things went. I didn't understand." Victor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for saying that. We can move forward only if we learn." The deputy nodded, and they talked until the lights in the center dimmed. In quiet times, Victor still felt the bitter price he had paid. His career was broken, his dreams rerouted. But he also felt a deep truth settling in his heart: fairness and respect are not given by rank or uniform. They are earned by every action, every word. Though he no longer wore a badge, he carried something stronger: the conviction that one person's courage can change many hearts. On the first anniversary of the shooting, he returned to the old warehouse site. The building stood silent, its windows dark. He placed a small white flower at the door, a simple tribute to the moment he almost lost his life. He whispered a promise to continue fighting for truth, for respect, and for the rights of every person. Away with his head held high, certain that even bitter endings can lead to new beginnings.